George Jackson spent his early years in and out of juvenile prisons for robberies and burglaries. In 1961, something crazy happened. He was convicted of robbing a gas station for $70 and given a prison sentence of at least 1 year with no end date. Essentially, he was given life in prison for $70, and honestly, that's f***ed up.
Well, I was incarcerated under a 1 to life. A term they called for 1 to life, where I could have done 1 year and been released. I've done 10. That's more time than anybody in the state has ever done on a 1 to life.
During his time there, he was often called antisocial by prison guards, but he did have friends. Most notably, W.L. Nolan, who introduced him to Marxism. They laughed that the W.L. in his name didn't actually mean anything, joking that they just did that where I'm from. The two would go on to form the Black Guerrilla Family in 1966, which is often referred to as a gang, but described themselves as a radical left-wing political organization, and that's how they started. In 1969, Jackson and Nolan were transferred to Soledad Prison. It was during this time that he joined the Black Panther Party after meeting several members behind bars. Jackson's infractions would start to stack up, and he would repeatedly be sent to solitary confinement. On solitary, he would work on a book called Blood in My Eye, as well as study racial theory. The book would eventually become a bestseller, but inside the prison, he developed a following of other inmates. Things changed on January 12, 1970. Nolan was in the prison yard fighting with the Aryan Brotherhood. A prison guard named O.P.G. Miller fired shots that killed W.L. Nolan, Alvin Miller, and Cleveland Edwards, all black men who were specifically targeted. It's important to note that Nolan had been picking up signatures to file a lawsuit against prison official Cletus J. Fitzharris for creating an environment that exacerbated racial and social conflicts. There was enough evidence, and it was blatant enough, that charges were brought against Miller immediately, but the grand jury chose not to pursue it because black prisoners were not allowed to give statements. George Jackson stated what followed was selective retaliatory violence. 40 murders took place in the California prison system, with 20 being linked directly to the murder of W.L. Nolan. This included the first prison guard to ever be murdered in Soledad history. After these events, Jackson was often called erratic and confrontational, repeatedly being involved in incidents with prison guards over the next 5 days. Black inmates went on a hunger strike, and on January 17, 1970, he was charged with murdering a prison guard named John V. Mills by dragging him up 3 flights of stairs, beating him, throwing him from the 3rd floor of a prison wing, going down the stairs, and neatly placing a note next to his body. Alongside Fleeta Domingo and John Clutchette, on March 16, 1970, 2 white guards were taken hostage for nearly an hour. On July 23, 1970, a white guard named William H. Sewell is stabbed 40 times. White prisoner William Turner was found murdered and hidden under his cot, and they're accusing George Jackson of orchestrating all of this in just 5 days. The treatment of George Jackson, Fleeta Drongo, and John Clutchette, dubbed the Soledad Brothers, led to the formation of the Soledad Brothers Defense Committee, made up of lawyer Faye Stender, Angela Davis, and many other activists, including George's brother, Jonathan P. Jackson. Jonathan was said to have been just as good a writer as George, and George credited him with writing several passages for Blood in My Eye. On August 7, 1970, 17-year-old Jonathan took a satchel containing 3 guns taken from Angela Davis to the Marin County Courthouse. Inside, he took Judge Harold Harley, District Attorney Gary Thomas, and several jurors hostage. Inmates awaiting trial included Black Panthers James McClain, William Arthur Christmas, and non-Panther Rochelle McGee, who would be freed from handcuffs and aid in the standoff. Jonathan demanded the release of his brother. Jonathan would force hostages into a van and began heading to the highway, where his plan was to hijack a plane. Instead, the police ambushed him. It's debated if police fired the first shot or James McClain fired the first shot. But Jonathan Jackson, Judge Haley, William Arthur Christmas, and James McClain were all killed. District Attorney Thomas survived, but he was left paralyzed for the rest of his life. Described as the mastermind behind the events by the FBI, Angela Davis went on the run for almost 3 months through California, Chicago, Miami, and finally New York, where the FBI caught her. Richard Nixon went on TV to congratulate the FBI. She was found not guilty of all charges. I personally think the charges and trial of Davis were retaliation after they found love letters between Davis and George Jackson. Some will call them just friends, as Davis identifies as a lesbian, but oftentimes bisexuals simply choose to assimilate as straight, gay, or lesbian because it's easier to explain. But they read the letters at her trial. It was a big part of her going free. They thought they had secret communications between the two, and it was just Davis writing things like, "Not for many months have I been so depressed. You're the only one who could bring me out of states like this. And I love you, but do you feel the same?" For his part, George Jackson also wrote a letter to Huey P. Newton stating that he had proposed to Angela and would have married her if Eldridge Cleaver, quote, hadn't opened his mouth. But that's just a theory. George Jackson had now lost 2 brothers within a year, both an adopted brother in W.L. Nolan and now his little brother, Jonathan Jackson. I've never experienced that, but I believe that is enough to break a man and drive him to do things he ordinarily would not. On August 21st, 1971, Jackson had a meeting about a civil rights lawsuit he had filed against the prison. Similar to that of W.L. Nolan's planned lawsuit, Jackson was stating that the prison actively punished political prisoners, created and encouraged racial violence, routinely humiliated prisoners for entertainment, and so on. Jackson was being taken back to a cell. This part is not disputed by anyone. Allegedly, at this point, a gun poked from beneath an afro wig that Jackson had been wearing. Allegedly, he got this gun from civil rights lawyer Stephen Brigham. He allegedly shouted, "Gentlemen, the dragon has come," quoting Vietnamese revolutionary Ho Chi Minh. He then forced all the prison cells to be opened in the resulting riot. 5 officers and 2 white prisoners were all killed and placed in the Jackson cell. As Jackson fled across the prison yard in a scene all too similar to that of W.L. Nolan's, he was shot dead from a sniper in a tower. 3 days before the escape, Jackson had rewrote his will. He left everything, including royalties of his books, to the Black Panther Party. Some say the escape attempt was spontaneous, others say it was planned. I'm in the mindset it was planned because it happened on the anniversary of Nat Turner's rebellion. I'm not saying George Jackson couldn't have done any of the things he's accused of. He most certainly tried to escape prison, but he's not here to tell his story. And I think a lot of what was told is just flat out fabricated. I'm just saying, a lot of it relies on way too many things to go right and too many oddities. Nobody witnessed or heard a prison guard dragged up 3 flights of stairs and thrown over a balcony. Is he a serial killer? Why would he be leaving notes and taking time to arrange bodies in his cell during an escape? How did he kill 5 people and injure 3 more while freeing all prisoners from their cells in 30 seconds? Why would he even go back to his cell during an escape? 1 gun was enough to bring every prison guard into submission? A gun he got from a lawyer who had no prior connections to the Black Panther Party or Black Guerrilla Family? A gun he hid under an afro wig that never found its way to trial? AI doesn't write my script, so I look at sources. Joe Durden Smith wrote a book in 1976 alleging that prison guards were attempting to carry out an illegal and unauthorized execution of George Jackson. However, Jackson managed to escape and in the process released the locks on prison cells. Supposedly, he realized that multiple inmates would be killed if they didn't get him, so he rushed into the prison yard, sacrificing himself.
They don't tell me anything. They didn't even tell me he was dead. I found that out on the radio. They couldn't let him live. Wouldn't be any way possible for them to let him live. He's a black man. I raised my children to love people. I raised them to mingle in American society, but American society didn't want them.
I don't know what the truth is. The only people who do are no longer with us. What I do know is that the death of George Jackson was enough to mend the rift between Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, and Elaine Brown, even if it was only temporary. Elaine would sing, Bobby would give remarks and read condolences from Panthers around the world, and Huey would give a eulogy. George Jackson requested no flowers, only shotguns at his funeral. 7,000 people showed up, and there were no flowers, only shotguns. Panthers and family filled the church and streets with shotguns. In the newspaper recapping the funeral, Huey would write that George always worried about protecting those he loved, and by requesting shotguns at his funeral, he was protecting them even in death.